This morning, we're celebrating 80 years since our triumph in World War II, all thanks to the young men and women who so bravely signed up, risked their lives, many lost their lives, defending Britain.
But the question is, if another large-scale conflict were to break out, would we have that same fighting spirit? According to a new poll, nearly half of Brits said they would refuse to fight for their country under any circumstances. We're joined by former Armed Forces Minister Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who believes that Brits would stand up and fight, and senior lecturer in sociology, Dr Lisa Mackenzie, who says people feel the country isn't offering anything they would want to fight for. Thank you both for coming in to talk about this morning. Let's start with you, Lisa. So what is it, do you think, that means that people just wouldn't step up today in the same way that they did all those years ago?
I think we are a divided nation. I think people live in very sort of insular bubbles. They don't know how other people live. I think that this sense of Britishness and who we are has been diminished over the years. We are a country that has got very deep inequalities. And I'm not sure people know what would be the reason to sort of put your life and limb on the line for a country that, you know, you're not getting a lot back from. You know, traditionally, our soldiers come from the working class. And at the moment, the working class of their lives have been diminished. So, you know, to go to them and ask this, I think it would be very difficult.
And do you think even if there was an imminent threat, even if, you know, there was an enemy country on our doorstep threatening our freedom?
But like who? I mean, who's going to be, you know...
in this hypothetical situation.
Yeah, but...
Well, Russia's invaded Ukraine recently. Maybe...
So do you imagine that Russia's going to be walking through the Trafalgar Square at any day?
No.
They'll have to have conquered every single country in Europe.
So you think the whole nature, if it's changed anyway?
Well, exactly the same thing happened with Germany, and they did. So the question is, if that was to arise, would we fight? Anne-Marie, there was poverty, division, hardship, political struggle in the 1920s and 1930s, and yet when there was a Nazi threat on our doorstep, on the other side of the Channel, people rose up.
Absolutely. I think the sense of patriotism and defending not only your country but your family, your community, was why those extraordinary, brave, very young, so many of them, men, and then the women who then, you know, if you like, backfilled and picked up so many of the difficult jobs that needed doing, were willing to do that.
Lisa says it's different now. It's not the same anymore. We wouldn't. Well,
I think it's impossible to know. God forbid that a nation decides it wants to, you know, invade the UK in a, you know, as you say, is Russia on the, you know, on the foothills of Sussex? No, I don't think so, and that's very unlikely. But we are already under enormous threats. Let's be under no illusions. Russia may not be intending to invade, you know, the UK, but it's driving its submarines around, threatening, you know, in a very kind of coercive way, our day-to-day lives, our, you know, the undersea cables, the undersea, you know, we've got 40% of our power comes through sources from Norway, from France, you know, tackling some of those areas. That running threat that they're putting there should be the warning sign which says we have to understand that the world is not a safe place. Do we expect all our young people...
though, have risen to the call? If the threat is there,
yes,
in 1939, 1940, people did, would they again? Because Lisa, the polls are saying they wouldn't.
Because 35% say they would not be willing to take up... Sorry, just 35% said they'd be willing to take up arms in time of war. So that is a concerning figure, though, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think that's, you know, fair enough. When there is no sense of threat, there are those who have perhaps a, you know, a more immediate sense of, you know, national commitment rather than getting on with their own lives. But that was probably the case then there too. I mean, it was national conscription. No one had a choice, sadly, because the need to take on this vast Nazi enemy was huge, and, you know, volumes were necessary. One really hopes one doesn't have to see that sort of war again in Ukraine. Part of the issue with this horrible, you know, miles, you know, thousands of kilometres of land warfare is because we aren't either side using some of the more sophisticated tools that exist. So it's a really hard, you know, soldier-on-soldier land war. But the reality is that we are being put under pressure in so many ways by those who don't believe in our way of life, don't want us to have economic success, don't want to have the freedoms that we have. And if those got worse, I believe that our citizens would want both government to stand up for and, you know, take them on, but also, if necessary, they would come forwards and help do that.
But so who do you think, you know, should go, or who do you think should be part of the, you know, the war effort or the British Army? Do you think it should be conscripted, or are we going to do what we always do, is go into working class communities, target young, poor men who are having a really difficult time regarding what, you know, how their masculinity plays out as a working class man? And are we going to go and, you know, get those men again to fight for us? Because I think that is extremely unfair and wrong, because that's what the British Army has always done. It's gone to the poorest communities, like Sunderland or Mansfield, where I'm from, and they'll say, you know, you've got nothing, why don't you come and join the British Army? And today, when young people, actually all of us, I think the biggest threat to all of us is our own government at the moment. You know, we are having benefits cut, people are poorer, lives are much more difficult, people's identities are being diminished. I'm really not sure that going to people and saying, I know, you go and fight for your country, let's die for your country. I don't think people, working class people in this country, are going to go for that.
But working class people did fight for our country.
Yeah, my granddad did.
In 1930 and 1940.
My granddad was at Dunkirk, where he got injured, and then he went down the pit.
So your idea
and died at 58 from emphysema on his lungs.
You think your granddad wouldn't now?
What would my granddad do that now? I think if he was in our society, perhaps he wouldn't. And he did, and he joined up for that very reason. He joined up because he didn't want to go and work down the pit.
I just think you are so wrong about people in our country, including working class people. I think that they're patriotic. And if there's a threat, they would stand up and fight. And in 1945, they then went to the polls in a general election, voted out the Churchill government for a Labour government, which brought in a welfare state. It's possible to change societies if you have a democracy, but democracy's got to be defended. The idea of working class people wouldn't defend democracy. I just think it's nonsense.
Well, I think you're wrong, because we're in an extremely divided country. You know, I'm not sure that you would know that because you're here in London in a bubble. But
I live in Castleford, which is further north than Mansfield.
Well, if you do go to those communities, you wouldn't. You would. Well, so
it's interesting.
So do you know that those places have been diminished?
Just having a look at what people are saying on, you know, getting in touch with us this morning. Key said, do you really think the two lads I saw in Poundland yesterday filling their carrier bags with goods and just brazenly walking out without paying would go to war? Lisa says people think differently today. During World War II, there was a strong sense of patriotism. Everyone looked after everyone else. I mean, Anne-Marie, you know, when it comes back to that sort of, as Lisa's saying, looking at society today and how people are feeling about things, it isn't the same, is it?
No,
and would it be there in
but we are also
strength?
a richer country. Is it, you know, as perfectly distributed as we try to make it? Absolutely not. But if the country's under threat, if your family is under threat, if the sense that your community is going to be smashed by something evil that is really trying to get you, I don't know anyone more patriotic than those that just are trying to scrape a living in their communities, who would want to defend their families and their neighbours. I genuinely don't. I am, you know, constantly amazed by the commitment. And, you know, if we take the political landscape we're in, and, you know, Lisa's point about the present government, part of the reason why Nigel Farage is doing really well is that he articulates really clearly at a patriotic national level something that's important about what is important about being British. Now, is that a failure of other parties to do that? In our case, as the Conservative Party, 14 years of government and difficult challenges meant that, you know, perhaps some of those messages got lost. But that is a really powerful message, which those in, as Lisa describes them, some of these left-behind communities want to hear. That is patriotism at its core, which is the UK is an amazing country and we want to stand up for what it stands for. And for me, that means I have confidence in the people of our country.
On that note, we will leave it. Anne-Marie Trevelyan and Dr Lisa Mackenzie, thank you both very much. And just to say, it is obviously just as well that there were those people all those years ago who did stand up and fight and were prepared to do that, for which we are
including Lisa's granddad.
very grateful.